Welcome, everyone, to the Friday, June 12th edition of the Signals from Mars live stream, brought to you by the Mars Attacks podcast. Hello to everyone in the chat. Hello to Jeremy in the UK, who's already joining us. And hello to my guest, Mr. Joshua Toomey. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Vic. How you been, bud?
I've been doing good myself. I made sure to wear my... I guess you could kind of see that, my Ride the Lightning shirt, because the last time that I interviewed someone that had a Ride the Lightning poster in the background, everything went to shit. So I'm thinking, okay, since I know Josh has a Ride the Lightning framed in the background, let's see if I can change the angle here so we can actually see that.
There it is.
There we go. I said, you know what? I'm going to wear the shirt. This way we'll make sure, make sure that the video doesn't cut out, make sure that the audio all works for us. So,
well, now everything's going to fall apart and my computer is going to break. Thanks, Vic. Appreciate you.
I do what I can. So, little by little, people are trickling in. You have just joined Knotfest.
I have.
It's been what, 2-3 weeks now?
About a month and a half, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, about 5 episodes of 5 weeks.
Okay.
We've been talking about this since like February, and it's crazy because like I've been wanting to say something for so long, and
Right.
I would tell people here and there and be like, don't say anything, but we're doing stuff at Knotfest, and with Knotfest, I was a big fan of Bees, who is no longer with Knotfest, but I was a big fan of his old podcast, That's Not Metal. And I just kind of kept in touch with him. And when I saw that Knotfest was kind of taking the knotfest.com domain and turning it into more of like a journalistic empire, I was like, and this was like about a year ago. I'm like, dude, I got to get in on this. And he's like, we're just starting it up. So, hold tight. And when they decided to do a Twitch stream, very similar to like early MTV almost, like, we got a bunch of VJs together and we all have our own shows and things like that. That's when Bees kind of reached out again. He's like, hey, I might have something for you. And what do you think about this? And obviously jumped at the opportunity, and it's been awesome. I mean, it's, getting that Knotfest name attached to my, Talk Toomey and now Throwback Throwdown with Toomey, and just being able to add that to kind of the arsenal. It's been pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what it's like. Obviously not as big of a name, but that was one of my sticking points back in the day when I got kind of jettisoned from the whole talking metal umbrella. I was like, well, you don't understand that helps open doors. So, a lot of people don't understand that just being associated to something as big as Knotfest, which is huge. I mean, it's gotta open up the possibilities to interviewing people that maybe you've been knocking on their door for years. And it was like, beat it, kid. And now all of a sudden, you've got that name attached to it. And maybe the coin is on the other side where, you can turn them down as opposed to being the other way around.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, doing Talk Toomey for 6 years, I mean, I've got to interview pretty much everyone I've wanted to interview. I mean, obviously, Phil Anselmo's been on the podcast a few times, and maybe a guy in Metallica is maybe with the last kind of hurrah on all of this. The big guys like maybe like Dave Mustaine, stuff like that. But the one thing I've noticed was even yesterday's show, I had Sonny from POD on, and that was the first time that Knotfest reached out to a publicist who had to reach out to management, but it got done very quickly. It basically, because the show was on Thursday, it got nailed down on Wednesday that it was going to happen, to where like typically it would just be like a no, there's not enough time to get this together. But once the publicist knows that it's going to live on Knotfest and the Knotfest YouTube and, all the social medias and stuff like that, like people are jumping at the opportunity to do this. So it's pretty insane to watch it come together that quickly. I honestly, an interview with Sonny from POD would probably come down the pipeline, but just for the fact that they announced the 20th anniversary of Satellite,
Yeah.
touring on it, all that stuff, and being able to put it on Knotfest also made it that much bigger. And so it came together a lot quicker than just a regular episode of Talk Toomey would have came together.
Yeah, that's cool. As far as as far as people coming out, how many people have come out of the woodworks now to ask you to come on to come on your Knotfest show? Because obviously that, I'm assuming, is going to be very different to how you handle Talk to Me or even Drag the Water, because you're working for someone else. So at the same time, you kind of have to play within a specific structure.
Honestly, they've really given me free reign to get whoever I want on the show. They haven't really suggested Chris Sinzak. I was from Primrose Way, bro. But no, the Knotfest themselves, they haven't actually said anything to me about getting a certain person on. Like, I actually asked, I was like, hey, I need some help with a guest this week. And that's when they helped with the Sunny from POD. But everyone else, it's like, I'm coming at this with an email list and some phone numbers in my phone that I can reach out to and say, hey, I'm a part of Knotfest now. Can you do my live stream? And, getting a lot more yeses than nos on that. And even it was funny kind of coming down to the wire on Thursday's show. I didn't really have a guest per se before Wednesday. And then Wednesday rolls around and Morgan from Kitty says, oh yeah, I can do it. And then Sunny from POD can do it. And then Fernanda from Crypta did it. And then I was like driving down the road and I get a phone call from a phone number I don't know. And I just let it go to voicemail. And I get a text. It's like, hey, this is Zet from Exodus. I hear you need a guest for your show. And I'm like, oh shit. So I call him back. And it's crazy just to be on the phone with, Zet from Exodus, who I've never talked to before. Right. And then Gene Hoagland emailed me directly like, hey, I know you're in a bind for a guest. I can do it, this time. And I'm like, well, I got it covered, but next time. And, it's been pretty awesome that the relationships, I guess what I was trying to say is the relationships I've built over the last 5 or 6 years doing the podcast are really paying off now to where I've got a pretty good repertoire of guests that'll come on the show that, are names to begin with. And honestly, the Knotfest crew have been really kind of almost blown away with some of the guests that I've been getting. Like the guy that's running the whole thing, when I messaged him the schedule for yesterday, he was like, damn, dude, you went from like no guests to like a jam-packed show. So it's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. How much of that has to do with your past, being in Primer 55, being in other bands that you were in as well, building those relationships while you were out on tour with people? How much does that come into play in people actually being comfortable to work with you or to come on your show and to be able to kind of let loose? Because obviously when you interview people, there's a difference when you already have, as Mr. Gymnasium Sinzak has just mentioned, repertoire. when you have already a relationship with somebody, it's obviously different to when you're speaking to someone for the first time. So how do you think, being in 12 Volt and being in Primer 55 and everything else has helped you kind of facilitate your way into podcasting and opening some of these people up?
Well, I think with the being in Primer helped with the initial start of Talk to Me, because if you look at those first 10, 15 episodes, it was guys I had toured with or guys I had met through Primer or through even 12 Volt and just met over the years. And so when I was like, hey, I think I'm going to do a podcast, I just sent out a few emails and text messages. And luckily I had friends like, Billy Gray of Fozzy, who played in Primer for a minute, or I knew Frank Novinek of Hatebreed through some stuff. And obviously Chris Kale actually was in 12 Volt after me, goes on to be in one of the biggest bands of our time right now. So, so those and then Virus from Dope was one of the first early guests. And, we had toured with them, and Steve from Skin Lab toured with those guys. So I was able to get maybe the first 10 or 15 guests, from the people that I knew, so that when it did turn into approaching publicists, I was like, hey, I know it's a new show, but I've already had, the guy from Five Finger Death Punch and the guy from Soulfly and the guy from Hatebreed on the podcast. So it kind of opened that door up pretty quick. to get good guests on early. So, I mean, I guess that's really the only, I guess, kind of few steps I passed, getting into this stuff. I mean, I still take on the new band, the up and coming band here and there, but only now because people see the show as a launching point for a band, and not only it's not just new podcasts. We're going to give them to a new band and they can all learn, they trust that they're going to get their new band in front of some people and stuff. So yeah, so it helped Talk Toomey, and obviously moves on to now, I guess, thoroughly help the new Throwback Throwdown with the Knotfest.
Yeah. Before jumping on board with Knotfest, were you still having to jump through hoops with certain publicists or certain artists to try to get them on, or were people comfortable enough that they were, just coming on?
Yeah.
Just because,
I've had a really good, we do need a Rex Brown interview. I've had a pretty good track record of dealing with publicists, and not really. I've always seemed to be a pretty decent dude, and always been helping people out and things like that. So I've always had a pretty good relationship with publicists, and obviously now, when I posted that I joined up with Knotfest, some of the first emails I got were from my publicist friends, like, congratulations, we always knew you could do it, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been, never really had to jump through too many hoops, and, and I feel like, the podcast always been pretty good. So I think people, obviously publicists talk, like we all, all the podcasters talk, all the publicists talk. And so I think if the publicists find a podcast that's doing something and can get some headlines, they're like, hey, this guy seems to be doing something right. So I get, everybody talks, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense. As far as transitioning from just doing stuff from an audio format, now obviously, like we're talking here, you're doing the Twitch stuff. Was there any hesitation on your behalf to add that video component?
It's the funny thing about the video component was that I'd been doing this a little bit beforehand. I'd been doing some live stream stuff. Chris Sinzak, if you want guests that aren't the 13th guitarist of Enough's Enough, you kind of got to deal with some publicists sometimes there. But love you, Chris. Hey, look, Rockin' Pod, go to it. No, the I don't even remember the question. Now that I'm giving
the transition from
the
video.
So I had started doing some, obviously this pandemic that kind of disrupted everything, made me really look into getting the video format and getting higher speed internet and getting, streaming and a streaming system to learn how to get the software out and, everything else. So I found a really good streaming software, and I was having, a couple of guests on, I forget what night of the week, but we would, hop on and just, shoot this shit for a little while and then get off. But by doing that, obviously I was upgrading the internet and upgrading the camera and things like that. And then basically, and actually I bought an entire computer just to stream from. And like right when I bought the computer, that's when the Knotfest thing kind of popped up. So it's kind of all just kind of been building to this. It's not like I'm obviously anytime I go live on anything, it's nerve-wracking, because when you podcast, you can do 13 takes of what's up, guys, welcome to the show, or like, I didn't like that, I'm gonna try it again. But yeah, so it's different, but being in front of a camera, being in front of people and kind of talking, it's not necessarily second nature, but it's getting there.
Yeah. Along with you, a lot of different people joined Knotfest at the same time. What do you feel you add that Knotfest didn't have, or any of these people that are coming in don't have? What does Josh Toomey offer that the rest of them can't?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. I guess what they brought me in for was the Throwback Throwdown, the initial idea of the show was to be a little bit more of a history lesson in music. And, I would come on, the initial thought of the show was I would come on for like an hour. And if I was going to have someone from like Seven Dust on, we would talk about Seven Dust and getting the band together. And then the second hour, a member of Seven Dust would come on and then kind of give their side of it. And it quickly just turned into an interview show, which is kind of where my comfort zone is anyway. But I kind of came in as part of a Thursday was going to be more of a throwback Thursday. They were going to be a little bit more, going back and looking at older bands and things like that. So that's where I initially came into the thing, but it was actually pretty awesome. The guy that's kind of running the whole thing, after my first episode with Heidi from Butcher Babies, I turned off the computer after I was done, and I was like, I'm getting fired. That was the worst thing I've ever done. Everything sucks. I suck. I'm never going to podcast again. And within like 3 seconds, I got text messages from him like, "Oh my God, that was awesome. We need you to do more interviews." And this isn't announced yet. It's kind of been on a few things here and there. It's not officially announced yet, but Talk Toomey will be going over to knotfest.com also. So, it'll be pumped through their socials and all that stuff. So, obviously I guess I did something right. And then, they definitely wanted me on for, basically what I've been doing for 6 years for free is, come over and help them on their interview side and, get some headlines for them and some clicks and all that stuff. So it's going to be a lot of fun, but, I think they brought me in for what they got, which was kind of that interview guy. I mean, obviously was Bees was there and he's there. He was the interview guy. Like he loved, I would love a Mike Patton interview. Thank you. Rock and Roll Podcast, who has been on every stream I've done so far and always commenting. So I gotta thank him for jumping in and hanging out each week on the Throwback Throwdown. But with Bees being there, I was like, well, I'm probably just going to get like the secondary interviews and things like that. And then as they were coming together, Bees left to do his own thing. So I was like, well, here's a hole that I can fill. And so I jumped on it right away. Cause I mean, they've got Guitar Shredder, shows and Countdown to Oblivion, which is like kind of like a TRL type show with Hardcore Keem, Hardcore Keem, hilarious dude. Like he cracks me up all the time. We also do a show called First Listen. That's actually midnight Eastern, which is midnight my time, Thursday night into Friday morning, where a new album comes out. We listen to it through its entirety and kind of comment on it as it goes. That's always a fun show to do with him. That's the show I do with a co-host, Hardcore Keem. But yeah, if you want to laugh and check out some great reaction videos, watch some great reaction videos, you go and check out Hardcore Keem. Sinzak Mike did jump into my stream yesterday, and without me telling the moderator, they actually banned him, which when I saw it happen, I almost died laughing because he came in just being Mike, and they didn't know if it was a friend of mine or someone being a jackass, and I texted him back and said it was both. But yeah, they banned him from the Twitch stream.
You checked off both boxes there. Right.
Yeah, too funny.
So interesting, since we have Mr. Sinzak here. A few weeks ago, he was on the show, and we had a conversation about something that, let's see if you can hear this. I'm assuming you can recognize that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I got to cut it off before you and your former band ask for all the monetization of my video to go over to you guys.
I don't think any of that stuff's copyrighted or anything, so I think you'll be all right.
Just in case. Chris said...
Actually, it's that album right there. But
okay,
go ahead.
There you go. Chris mentioned that he saw you guys a bunch of times in Nashville, and it was funny, when I was looking up music for that specific spot that I knew I was going to do tonight, almost everything that I read was the band that should have been that never was.
Right.
2 questions.
All right.
One, who met who first? Did you reach out to Sinzak first, or did he meet you first? And 2, why did 12 Volt never get beyond Nashville?
Well, I'll start with the Sinzak thing. When I first got into podcasts and podcasting, I did the normal search of podcasts, and Decibel Geek was one that came up. I listened to a few episodes, and I didn't even know he was in Nashville for a few episodes, and then every once in a while they would sprinkle in a Nashville reference or Murfreesboro reference or something, and I was like, I need to look these guys up. And I think I've found him on Facebook and friended him and stalked him and showed up at his work and everything else that you can do. But actually, when I first met them, I knew that they were going to do that. Was it Freedom Rock? They were going to that big mess of a show, and I actually went to Nashville just to go to Freedom Rock, but I didn't care to go to the show. I was actually going to meet those guys, like meet Aaron and Chris. And I wasn't 100% sure what they looked like. And I ended up kind of standing behind Aaron Camaro at one point and, just introduce myself and, kind of networking in the podcasting thing. Because when I started podcasting, I didn't know anybody. Mm-hmm. And yes, well, it would have been the missed connections section on Craigslist, but no, it was, I really enjoyed what they did. I got into them. I was telling him it was the Perry Richardson episode for some reason was like one of the first ones I listened to. I went back and, listened to all the Vinnie Vincent stuff, Farm Rock, not Freedom Rock, same stuff.
Farm Rock, turn it up, man. That's the old compilation that they used to advertise on TV. So I get it. You had that in mind.
But yeah, so I just went down there basically to meet them. So I met those guys and then ended up being on their show a few weeks later or however long later. And then obviously been in all the Rockin' Pods and, friends and all that stuff. So yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's basically, I met Sinzak as a fan of what he did, not knowing that he had ever seen my old band or knew who I was at all or anything like that. So
that's what I was going to bring up. That's kind of interesting because he flat out says that he saw you guys in concert a few times.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting because I have people that follow my show that kind of a similar deal where we live 2 towns away from each other and we've met living 3,000 miles away. And we probably were in the same record stores. We were at a few of the same shows and whatnot, but didn't know one another.
Oh, right.
So, yeah.
So I mean, there's definitely the Kiss reunion show in Nashville. We were both at the same show. There was an Ace and Peter tour in 95 or something like that we were both at. And there weren't that many people there, so we were probably standing right next to each other. But there was definitely a bunch of shows over the years that Chris and I were both at, Metallica shows here and there and things like that. So, pretty crazy that it took us to almost our 40s to finally meet.
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously, I can't ask you if the rumors were true about you trying out to play bass for Primrose Way.
I mean, I've tried. They won't even return my calls. I'm like, we have got to get this band back together and let the world know about what's going on at Primrose Way, but he just won't listen to me. So it's a pretty tough time.
You need a furry leather strap, or a furry leopard strap is what I meant.
Nice. Your other question about 12 volt, which is obviously something, you always wonder and you always think, and hindsight's 2020 and all that about why your band didn't make it. And there were a few times where we were headlining some of the biggest clubs in town, selling out 1,000-seat clubs, and but then you look back and you're like, the songs were good, but they weren't great. And, everybody we had one common goal, but we were all kind of spread out. I think the vision wasn't there for everyone to kind of buy in on, and didn't meet the right person, the right manager, the right producer. Honestly, Fred Corey from Cinderella produced some of our early stuff, and he tried to get that out to people, but that was kind of weird. How none of that kind of came through. And then we ended up we did a showcase for TVT and TVT Records, who had, Seven Dust and like Nothing Face at the time. And I think 9 Inch Nails may or may not have been still in the label or not. But, so we went up to New York and we did a showcase for TVT. The lady that had us up, she didn't even stick around. We we filmed the show. We filmed a lot of stuff back then. We filmed the show and watched it back, and it was like the worst show possible. Everybody was just nervous and freaking out, like, this is our break, but we're gonna, crumble it up and break it and stuff like that. So, we had a pretty good, 6-7 year run there where, any band that came through town, we were the opening band. We opened for Limp Bizkit. We opened for the Reunited Misfits at one point, shows with like Hatebreed and Stuck Mojo. And, basically any large band that came through town, 12 Volt was probably going to be the opening band, like it or not.
Right.
But yeah, just honestly, it's funny doing the podcast for so long, because you ask bands, how did you guys make it? Or what was the thing that, took you over the top? And it's always like, oh, we met this guy that knew this person, or we met this entertainment lawyer, or we met this, it's always like we met this one dude that happened to know another dude,
Right.
And we never really met the dude that knew the other dude.
Right. Gotcha.
Because we toured, we would headline show. We headlined in a few cities. We did really good in like New Orleans and St. Louis and, all the surrounding area. And, but yeah, I just never really got to that next step. We never really had that, powerful attorney reach out, or that manager reach out, or anything like that.
What was the moment that you realized that it wasn't going to work and that you had to move on?
There was a point where we had just tried and tried and tried. And, I was, as I am now in the podcast, just being kind of the one that's like pushing everything. Like, we got to do this, we got to do that. And I just really didn't feel like the other guys like were right, or everybody loved being in the band. I just didn't feel like it was going. And I think I just kind of held it in for a long time. And like one day I just showed up to the practice space a little bit before everyone else, packed up my gear. When they showed up, I was like, I'm done. And they were like, well, that sucks. and then I drove away. And then like, once I drove away, it was just like all the relief happened. And then a few days later, I called them back and I was like, hey, I'm kidding. I was joking, and they're like, no, like, well, there was like one or two guys was like, no, I think we're, you quit on us and we're going to move on without you and all this other stuff. And they ended up doing like, one more CD after I left, which I still listen to and I actually really enjoy. But that's the one with Chris Cale from Five Finger, took my place. But then, obviously that tour just kind of, they did a small tour, and while they were on tour, they just kind of all fell apart and dissolved. And some of the most talented people I've ever been around in my life, kind of sucks that it didn't go anywhere or go further. But, yeah, it just never happened. And actually, it's funny, the Primer thing came because I quit 12 Volt with no idea what to do. And then kind of in the same vein of the podcast and the news show and everything else, I had made some relationships over the years. And Bobby Burns from Primer 55 was one that when I was in 12 Volt, we couldn't tour for some reason. There was something going on, but we had just put out an EP. We couldn't tour. I was like, I'm going to go on tour following Korn. So me and my drummer, we jumped into like a Honda Civic and we followed Korn for like 4 or 5 shows, just selling the CD in the parking lot. $5. We had the headphones, we had the Discman, walk up and be like, hey, you guys want to check out our band? They would put the headphones on, buy it or don't buy it. And Primer bust. I wish Primer van. That's what it is. But we'll get to that. So we're going up to different people and, selling the CD and making a little bit of money. We would end up, making enough for like a cheap hotel and gas to the next city and maybe some food. And we would just do that over and over. And then we got to let's see, it was Korn and Stained,
Mhm.
and they had a day off. So Stained was supposed to play a headline show in Louisville, and the local up and coming, freshly signed band on the bill was Primer 55. And Stained actually ended up canceling. So Primer played just a long extended set. We were already in town. We'll go over there. We'll try to sell our CDs.
Right.
So Jason and Bobby from Primer kind of walked by at one point, and they just had this air about them that was so like infectious. You're like, oh, these guys, if you want to go somewhere in life, you go with these guys because they had the it factor.
Mhm.
You don't know what that is, but you're like, these guys, obviously have it. So after the show, talked to them for a little bit, tell Bobby, gave him my CD or whatever, and just kind of kept in touch with them. And then about, a few months later, I read on the PRP that they've lost their bass player. So the guy that runs the PRP, who still runs the PRP, had done, some 12-volt stuff, some reviews of our CDs and
Right.
things like that here and there. So I reached out to him and said, hey, I see that Primer needs a bass player. Can you help me out? And he's like, I don't really want to mess up your band because you guys are doing some cool stuff, but I'll give you Bobby's email address and pass it on. So after Introduction to Mayhem, I go up to Louisville, start auditioning for Primer. I actually don't get the gig. And then the new release comes out, and I got a CD sampler with one of the songs on the new release, popped it in the CD player, hit play, and it was a song called This Life. Mm-hmm. And I was so distraught. I was like, this is an amazing song. They're going to be so huge. And I didn't get it. Right. And obviously, and 9/11 happens and all that other stuff, and the scene kind of changes and all that. So I mean, there was a lot going on. I mean, they blame everything from 9/11 to Napster to everything else of why that there weren't more album sales and the shift and everything. But still kept in touch with Bobby. Saw him again a few times on tour. So 12-volt, I leave 12-volt with no idea what to do. I have like 3 people's email addresses. One is Bobby, and I email Bobby and I say, hey man, I'm out of a band. If you know anybody that needs a bass player, let me know. He writes me back, I'm thinking about doing a side project. Why don't you come up to Louisville and I'll play you the demos? Because Louisville, Nashville, about 3-hour drive.
Right.
And so I go up and I'm like, hell yeah. So drive up there and he plays me the demos. Those demos could have been anything. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in. It ended up being some cool stuff, but it was like, it could have been, some sort of weird new wave, art deco music, if that's even a thing. But at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, I'll play bass on this, let me know when and where. And he goes, okay, but we've got one more Primer tour. When we get back, you meet up with us and we'll start this band. And I'm like, all right, cool. I go home. I'm like delivering pizza at the time. I get a call one day when I'm like on delivery. He was like, dude, can you learn the set in, 2 days? We're leaving on tour. We need a bass player. Can you do it? And I'm like, yeah, I can do it. Basically hung up the phone, delivered the pizza, went back to, Domino's or wherever and said, hey, I got to go on tour. And, the people that ran the place were pretty cool. So they were like, yeah, no, we understand. And obviously let me go. And yeah, I mean, within like no time at all, it was just like quit 12-volt, meet up with Bobby, and immediately like on tour, on a US tour with Dope and Skin Lab. It was nuts.
Cool. Yeah, and that's that side project that you came up to Louisville for, that never materialized.
Well, what happened with that was we actually still were going to do it. That's actually why I live here now. Because after the Primer tour, we came home and I was driving back and forth from Louisville to Nashville. And I was like, I'm just going to move to Louisville, which I'm probably the only person that's moved away from Nashville for music. But I moved up here. We were practicing, we were jamming. Actually, Jason Daunt from Flaw was in the band for a while. And, it was honestly like early emo or something. It was like, it was kind of like that vein of like a little bit more in like a weird emo vein. But we did it, and I was sitting there at Bobby's house, and he was checking his email. And he looks over at me, and he was like, I just got an email from Gloria from, Gloria Cavalera.
Mm-hmm.
They want me to join Soulfly. What do you think about that? I'm like, what do you mean? What do I think about that? I'm like, you joined Soulfly,
Right.
And obviously they pulled him in to play bass. I didn't know if he knew if they had Mark Rizzo yet or not. Because he did say that he was going to attempt to be the guitar player and then have me be the bass player in Soulfly, which would have been amazing.
Right.
But obviously they pulled him in to be the bass player. They had Mark Rizzo, and the story there is done. So he kind of went away, and I stayed here. And then I did some local band stuff here and there, but I just kind of really like, and which is crazy because I was like 23 or 24, and you're like, and you get to that point in life where you're like, if I'm 24 now, it's going to take about 3 or 4 years for a band to get successful. So that'll be 28, and 28 is dinosaur in music, and and so you're just like, it almost just kind of bums you out to the point where you don't even want to do it. It's weird. It's a very weird place to be. And then now, you start looking at dudes like, I hate to keep bringing him up, but Chris Gale, Five Finger Death Punch, he joined Five Finger Death Punch when he was like 38 years old.
Right.
It's like bands are just now breaking and they're all in their 40s. It's a weird time.
Right. Absolutely. What's the van story from Chicago that Sinzak is bringing up?
So Bobby is he's a tough person to be around. I love him to death. He's had his ups and downs, but he's very on edge, and he never, he always drove. We did a van tour, so he drove the van, and we were in Chicago, and he was like, "Toomey, I need you to drive." And it was stop and go traffic, and he was trying to lay down in one of the bench seats, like right behind me, and he's like, "Toomey, I swear, if you don't stop slamming on the brakes, I'm gonna come up there and punch you in the back of the head or something," And I'm like, "Dude, there's nothing I can do. It's stop and go traffic."
Right.
It's just one of those times. But yeah, the van story just basically, Bobby threatened to just kill me in the middle of Chicago if I didn't stop stomping on the brakes. But too funny.
Were you ever allowed to drive the van again after that?
I don't think so. No, I think I did a bad enough job to where they never asked me to do it again.
One and done. Now, was that done purposefully to not have to drive again, or was that just?
That's just how. That's it. That was just how I was driving in the conditions that they were there. I was still brand new in the band. I wanted to be. If they would have told me to drive every day, I would have done it, or pack all the gear, I probably would have done it. I was just happy to be on tour.
Yeah. There haven't been any reports about any mail trucks having their engines seized or anything after you take them, have there?
No, not that I know. No.
Cool. As far as you've brought up Rockin' Pod a few times, you're going to be there this year as well. What has that meant to you as a podcaster? Because obviously you formed relationships with other shows. You have been on other shows as well, quite frequently. What does Rockin' Pod mean to you?
Well, let me first put this out here since Sinzak's on the line. I'm waiting for him to refund me my money and then to actually pay me to show up to Rockin' Pod this year as a featured guest. So when that happens, we'll talk again. There's Sinzak. But no, Rockin' Pod, it's an idea that when it kind of first came up, of all of us getting together, and there was like definitely a FOMO, like a fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Because I knew of all the shows going to be showing up down there. And obviously, Cobras and Fire and even Talking Metal was there that first year. And Michael Butler, he was there that first year. And there were just so many shows, Ages of Rock, and I'm going to miss a bunch of them. And I know if any of them are watching, I'm sorry, but the camaraderie was cool. And that's the one thing about podcasting that I think is very underrated about all of this is I didn't expect the friendships to be made out of podcasting. Like even you, Vic, I mean, how the hell would we have ever met, had it not been for a couple of microphones and talking about Kiss or something, it's like because you go into this and it's such a solo venture. it's just you and a microphone, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm going to talk about, Ride the Lightning or something this time. But then you put out enough episodes, and then a Sinzak pops up in your life, or, Baco or something like that will come up. And I text with Sinzak and Baco probably more than I do any local friends that I have. It's like so the camaraderie and the community of podcasting was something, the most unexpected thing of all was that, and I take that over even, some of the musicians I've met through podcasting that I'm friendly with, or I'll hit a text with every once in a while. But, Chris Aiken, all those dudes like that are friends for life, and it would have never happened had it not been for you always get the best dick pics. I try really hard. I've got the ring light. I try to get the right angle, shave it up for you. And that segment was brought to you by Manscaped. But but yeah, no, the podcasting community was something that I would have never expected to have been here. Even Mark Striegel and all those guys. It's like, you can reach out to them and they know you. It's crazy.
Yeah, last week I had Bob Nalbandian on.
Yeah, another guy.
Yeah, I was describing beforehand to my brother, and I mentioned this when I released the audio format today. You think about everything that Bob has done. There's no reason why he should know who I am. Nonetheless, email me from time to time, want to catch up, always encourage, stuff like that. So it's amazing how, the friendships that have been made over the years, thanks to podcasting. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, he's encouraging you just like he did a young Lars Ulrich back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what what I try to explain to these people. I'm like, when people say, yeah, I was talking to Mustaine, or I was talking to Eddie, or not to Eddie Trunk. I'm alluding to Eddie Trunk is what I should say.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, or a young Lars. No, he actually knew these people before they were anything, and that's why he continues to be friends with these people. So, yeah, I'm a better drummer than who? You've never heard me play, unless
he's talking about Lars. But I guess anybody is better than Lars if you've heard them or not. Another thing that you were talking about, what the crazy side of podcasting is, I guess the one, and obviously he's going through some trouble right now, but the one dude, Dave Ellefson, who's been great to every podcast ever. Mm-hmm. He's been on everybody's show multiple times. And I think that's one, honestly, right about now has really paid off for him, because we're all like, no, dude, he's a solid dude. And, just the fact that David Ellefson knows who I am, when we connect, he's like, hey man, how you been? I haven't talked to you in a while, and blah, 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 like those are the types of things that kind of blow you away. Cause obviously being a bass player growing up, David Ellefson, that's, that's David Ellefson, how do you go wrong with it? And for the fact that when you get on the phone with him or seeing him in person, he knows who you are and respects what you do. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The first time I got to speak to him was in November. And someone had said to me, well, he's on a lot of shows. He's been around, blah, blah. I'm like, it's David fucking Ellefson. To me, it was a big deal, so, I'm right in that boat with you. And, the only thing I can say out of everything that's happened is, unfortunately, I think that people were ready to string him up without knowing all the facts. You, like you said, if it was the opposite, and we could name a bunch of different people that I'm sure that we know that have been totally dicks to us behind the scenes. Yeah. And then once the mic goes on, things change. If it was that, I'm sure the entire podcasting community, as you said, would have come out and just said, you know what, fuck it, burn them down, right. And that hasn't happened.
Well, I mean, Sinzak being on the line here, but it's, the Vinny Vincent effect. We were all rooting for Vinny, and we wanted him to do well and come back and just pop your head out and play some shows and all that other great stuff, you know. And he basically burns the bridges with some of the people that were keeping his name alive for so long, and where we all are like, you know, we're not going to support this guy. You know, if Vinnie Vincent reaches out and says, hey, can you do an interview? You know, a lot of us are going to say no.
Yeah. Vinny who? Wait a second.
Apathy.
Yeah. No, that would be with a Y. So Mr. Zinzak, here's your response to that. Bastard gay. All right. Anyway. Yeah, I agree. That's something that I spoke to Chris about, and I've mentioned it a bunch of times. You know, after Vinny fucked with Zinzak, I was a huge Vinny fan, but after that, it was I didn't have a use for it. And even now they've announced music and everything, and I know that there's people that are excited, but I was like, all right, done. For me, he's done, you know, because not only everything that he's done to fans over the years, which is just one dirtbag move over another. Right. But just the fact that when he messes with somebody who's a friend of yours, and so many people, you know, are friends of Chris through Rockin' Pod and just through different things, you know, what happened was unwarranted, and he got to see what, you know, people were saying for years. And it always amazes me that you still have people that defend them or bring up the whole, oh, he saved Kiss. Yeah, that's like, you know, as much as I love Marty Friedman, as much as I love, you know, Jakey Lee or Zach or whatever, you know, not for nothing, but without Gene and Paul, Vinnie Vincent doesn't happen. So they were still steering the ship, whether they were taking advantage of his talent or not. The ultimate, you know, and you know this from being in bands. You step into a Primer 55, or even we're talking about Soulfly. As talented as Mark Rizzo is, and he's a ridiculous guitarist, without Max steering that ship, none of that happens.
Right.
You know, so I think people have a logical take on things. A lot of it has to do, I think a lot of it has to do with people being much like armchair quarterbacks who have never played an instrument and don't know what it's like to be in a band, to come into a band. And no matter how great you are, if you've been hired for a spot, you're supposed to fill that spot. You're not supposed to go beyond it. You're not supposed to go, you know, and maybe after a while that you're there, things change. But when you're coming in the door and you're coming into an established brand name, you know, doesn't make a lot of sense.
I mean, it's a Vinnie Vincent walking into Kiss, you know, obviously he's, you know, wide-eyed and probably will do anything to get on stage and be a member of Kiss, you know? Right. And you know, you're saying the same thing with Soulfly. It's like, dude, that's Max Cavalera. Yes, I'll be in your band. I'll pay you to play for, you know, you can definitely walk in and kind of get blindsided and maybe used in that situation too, where, you know, I was actually thinking about this today, because there, you know, a lot of Ozzy records where it says all music written by Ozzy, and you're like, nah, there's no way he wrote a lick of that. You know, and Soulfly records that say all music written by Max Cavalera, and you're like, I may or may not know a few things about that, you know. So, but when you walk into that situation and you're like, dude, that's Ozzy, you know, the guy from Black Sabbath, and you know, I want to be famous, so I'm gonna say yes to whatever he sends. You know, kind of the same thing you know with Bobby's band that he tried to get me in. Mm-hmm. You know, those demos could have been anything. I'm signing up. You know, if they would have, if he would have threw a contract in front of me that said, you're in the band, you'll be a quarter member of the band, but you get no publishing and you get no this, no that, I'm signing it, you know, because you want that, you know, you want that step, you want that stepping stone, you want to take that next step into playing shows and big shows and being in a big band and things like that. And you got, there have been bands that I've interviewed on the podcast that, you know, they all talk about, you know, getting fucked by the record label. And I'm like, well, you might have, but you also didn't read the contract because you were so excited to read the, you know, to sign that you didn't even read it. You know, you got, I mean, a good friend of mine I had for a long time was Mike from Spine Shank, Mikey Shank. Mike Sarkeesian. He talked about, when Roadrunner gave him their contract, he pulled it out of the manila envelope just enough to where he saw the signature line, signed it, put it back in, and sent it back because he didn't want them to change their mind. And obviously that standard Roadrunner contract for back then was a nightmare. It's like 7 records, and you own nothing, and you own no publishing and all this other crazy stuff. It's a crazy contract, but hey, Roadrunner came for 12 volt. We were all signing.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely it. When they start to talk about a lot of the things regarding streaming, for example, all that stuff is signed over once with these contracts. And like you're saying, 95% of the bands are just excited to get on a Roadrunner, to get on a Century Media, to get on a Nuclear Blast. They just want to have an album out on an iconic label like that. You're in a metal band.
Yeah.
What label do you want to sign to? You're going to want to sign to, one of those, a Nuclear Blast, a Metal Blade, a Roadrunner. And I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone else, but there's a lot of labels out there. What I'm getting at, you get on one of those, you work for one of those companies and you say, shit, Roadrunner, Slipknot, Typo, Fear Factory, you start to think about their history and what their bands meant to you, how those labels, I stole this term from Charlie Benante, where he mentioned it on Twitter about a year ago. The soundtrack of your life. How much did Roadrunner help create the soundtrack to your life?
It was it was everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So you work towards that and you sign whatever's put your way. It's similar to when people start to talk about, oh, well, how can so-and-so, how can Tommy and Eric play for Kiss? If they offer you, if you're a guitarist and a drummer, listen, you have to dress up this way. You're going to make more money than you have in your life. It's going to be a steady job, but you have to do everything we tell you.
Right.
Most people are going to say, okay, when do I show up?
Right.
Honestly, for a lot of people that have tried to be a musician to say, oh no, I wouldn't have done that. Oh, you wouldn't have. So you'd prefer to be playing a coffee house or, whatever for a few, or on a corner in Nashville somewhere, getting a few nickels thrown at you.
I do tend to think about this a lot with independent labels and independent artists and things like that. You get an artist that sells, these are obviously astronomical numbers at this point, but you get a self-released album and you sell 100,000 copies of your self-released CD.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make a shitload of money.
Yeah.
But that's only 100,000.
Right.
But if you were to put it on a major label and it goes on to sell 1 million, you might actually make less.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want the 1 million sold or do you want the 100,000 sold? And maybe make it up in t-shirt sales and things like that later on. There's a really crazy, the math of being in a band is insane. I had, every band out there complains about Spotify and complains about streaming royalties. And it's an exercise I've done with, you take the 0.00003 whatever that Spotify pays. And go look at some of your favorite songs that actually have how many downloads it has. Do the math on some of that. Some of the numbers you'll come back with are insane. Like how much that 0.00003 times, 985 million downloads, you're going to make a pretty decent chunk of change.
Yeah.
But the problem is the record deal that person signed, who owns the masters. You've got all this behind the scenes stuff to where maybe that album that they're complaining that they're not making any money off streaming still hasn't recouped the studio costs from that album. So everything that they're making from streaming is still going back to recouping and things like that. So you have all that stuff out there with, and obviously smaller artists, you're probably good, go to Bandcamp and donate and, try to buy a t-shirt, anything that goes directly into the artist. But if you're going to whine and complain about Metallica's royalties from Spotify, don't worry about it. They own the masters. I just recently had Rob Rivera on the Slipknot show, on the Knotfest show. And he was talking about that they just got back their rights to like Bullet with the Name, which is like one of their biggest songs.
Mm-hmm.
And he said Bullet with the Name almost alone paid all of his bills through the pandemic. He said, I'm not rich,
right,
but my mortgage was paid, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to look at it like, so, I mean, you got guys like Jamie Jost out there that's doing the Josta project where he's putting out, music under his own name, owning all the masters. And he is, screaming from the rooftops, own your masters and you'll make a few bucks, from streaming. It's all in the deal that you made and who owns this and who owns that. And, nobody was worrying about how much, Ozzy made off of a Bark at the Moon one album sale back in the day. I don't know where this change came to where we all of a sudden got so wrapped up in how much artists are making per stream.
Right.
It's a weird time.
Because if you think of that, Bark at the Moon or any of those albums, what were they making? Like Metallica had one of the best deals where they were making like $1 per album after
Something
the Black
like
album.
Yeah.
So if you kind of break that up per song, it's a few cents per song.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, you actually brought up Peter Frampton the other day when you were on Cobras and Fire. And Peter Frampton, about a year or two ago, showed a check. Look at how much I got for Baby I Love My Way or Baby I Love Your Way.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, you were ripped off by what? 2-3 fucking managers where they took all of your money, where it's the typical slothish mentality where like you're saying, oh, I just play music. I let my guy take care of all of that. Yeah, well, your guy was taking care of himself while you were going to be getting 38 cents for 1 million streams in 40 years because you didn't look at the contract or you didn't have anyone of, who was looking out for you. Nikki Sixx, every time Motley Crue comes out with something, complains about Spotify, but they sold their catalog off, like a year or two ago. So if you're selling the rights to your publishing off to somebody, of course you're not going to get, as much as you were in the past because you sold the rights to recoup all that money, to get a big lump sum. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with all of this, where there's a lot of people that are, I don't want to say crying poverty, but that are, saying, oh, well, big bad Spotify or big bad YouTube is doing this, is doing that. But at the same time, I mean, it's like the perfect promotional tool for anything that a band is trying to do now. You can argue again whether they're getting the right share or not. But in the past, even when MTV was going and everything, let's add up all the streams that some of these bands are getting. Right. Were they getting the same airplay on stations? Were they getting the same play on MTV? And, a lot of that has also changed because for a long time, us as podcasters were pushing a lot of bands and a lot of their music. And, not until, the whole thing went down with Spotify last year, did a lot of people kind of put the brakes on playing a lot of music during their shows. So I mean, again, I think a lot of it has to do with people on both sides of the equation here not being informed. Bands trying to sell one thing to fans, and at the same time, the band's not doing their due diligence when they're signing things. So
yeah, and a lot of those guys like Peter Frampton and even obviously I just interviewed KK Downing, which is kind of funny if you followed along with the Diablo Sympodcastica podcast about my views on how much I love Judas Priest. But it's looking back on their catalog, you've got the first two out, Rock-a-Rolla and Sad Wings of Destiny. They've never made a dime from those two albums. They don't own anything on those two albums. And reading his book, KK says that that every time that album gets re-released and everything else and special editions, still don't get anything from that. They've never made a dime from those 2 albums. It's crazy for a band to, especially in those days where you've got, nobody knew, back in the 70s, nobody knew streaming was ever going to be a thing. So contracts, I know they've always kind of had these clauses in there. It's like a new format clause, because, you start out on vinyl and then cassettes show up and then CDs show up and then obviously streaming shows up and you kind of got to keep going and go with the times and stuff. But, I guess some of those older bands really need to, find out what's going on financially for them. I mean, even with, the Creedence Clearwater songs, John Fogerty for years wouldn't play those songs because the record label owned all those songs. Anytime you hear, a CCR song on the radio, John Fogerty doesn't get any of that ever.
Right.
And so that's why forever he would never play those songs live. And then he has some silly story about going to Robert Johnson's grave and he's like, who cares who owns Robert Johnson's songs? They're still great songs and blah, blah, blah. So that's why he started playing those songs again. But I think honestly, the industry's always been messed up. It's always been crazy. It's always, this guy's out to screw that guy, not necessarily ran by fans, it's ran by business people. And you kind of got to keep an eye on everything you're doing because back to Roadrunner, you signed over your merchandise rights, back in the day, you would get that, what was it, Blue Grape catalog in the mail, and it was all the typo and the obituary and deicide and stuff like that. But they had all the merchandising rights, and but for all those bands that you say, who the soundtrack of your life, when I would go to a record store and I pick up a CD or a cassette or record and it had that Roadrunner stamp on it, I didn't care what it was. I was going to check it out. I was going to buy it, so, and I guess it kind of goes back to that 100,000 or a million, like, do you never get heard and make, a few bucks, or do you get heard and you might get screwed? It's such a weird place to be, and the whole thing with getting your CD out there and, would I want Vic in Spain to own a 12-volt CD if I never earned $1 from it? Yes. Even if it meant that I got screwed, it's a weird thing.
Did you guys have distribution over here?
No. Actually, I bought that off of eBay. Cause I was the guy that's like, you want to hear my band? Here's my CD. You want to hear my band? Here's my CD. And I never kept a copy of it. And, one day I was like, I was on eBay, popped in 12-volt negative earth, and boom, it popped right up. And it was like $10. And I was like, I'll buy my own album for $10. And somehow it ended up in like Ohio or something. She's like, yeah, I bought I emailed the lister, and I was like, so funny you have this for sale. I'm actually the guy in the picture, and whatever. So it was funny that she's like, yeah, I bought it in a thing in Ohio.
Oh, wow. So see, it got somewhere.
Right. It was probably one of my many that I just sent out to people like, please sign my band. Please give me a shitty record deal. I'll sign anything.
It ended up in the, we used to have a flea market every Sunday, and all the unsigned bands and all the promo stuff ended up in one bin off to the side. So you could get like a lot of, I remember getting like the first Orgy album and like Fu Manchu album for like $1 a piece, because it was before no one really knew who either band was, and it was in that promo bin. So I was like, oh, okay, well, it's only $1 if it isn't any good, not really.
And the funny thing about that, it kind of goes back to the streaming thing, which is if you bought that $1 CD at a yard sale or wherever, the band doesn't see any of that.
Yeah.
Like, they've never made anything off of that CD. If you sell it and then you sell that Fu Manchu CD to your buddy and he sells it to his buddy. Everybody's making money except for the band at that point.
Yeah. It's even crazier over here. I was explaining this to Sinzak because we were talking about documentaries, and there are a lot of music documentaries that aren't on streaming over here because there's an association for, there is in the States as well, for musicians, basically. It's similar to like an ASCAP, and but the difference is that they've been able to get certain laws put into place where this was about 15 years ago, where phones started to have the ability to download music onto them and stuff like that. So they passed laws where any form of media where you could put digital content on it was instantly taxed. There was a 10% tax added, and then that went directly to the Musicians Association. The problem with that is that it was done under the guise of, well, this money is going to help out all of the new up and coming bands that aren't making the money that they should because of pirating, so on and so forth. And you talk to any band out there, and no one's ever seen a dime outside of the higher ups that are retiring, making $80,000 a month for their retirement. So there's a scam everywhere. there's the shell game going on somewhere, regardless where you are. So,
I remember back when Napster kind of first popped up, and we were all mesmerized by it. But you're on dial-up internet that you would literally hit download on a song and then have to go to work and then come home, and it may or may not have downloaded while you were gone. And then a friend of mine got like a little bit higher speed internet, so we would go over his house and find singles on there and stuff like that. But it would still take all day to get an album.
Right.
And then I remember, as things progressed, and I remember when a torrent site kind of first popped up, and you could click in Deftones, and in one click download the entire catalog for free. I was like, man, this is getting out of hand. because early days of Napster, it was still cool to get some songs for free, but it was still a pain in the ass.
Right.
So it was still easier just to go buy the album, because if you downloaded, we'll just say a Deftones song again, if you download, you may or may not even get a Deftones song. You may have got, or you might got it taped off the radio, or a live version, or another guy's band that he labeled as Deftones. You never knew what you were getting. So at that time, it was still a little bit easier just still to go buy the album. You knew what you're getting. But yeah, man, once late 2000s, when torrent sites were really big, and I was like, go to like Pirate Bay and just hit one button and get an entire discography downloaded to your computer. You're like, ooh, this is really bad. So you can either do that, or I guess support streaming, which is funny because if you look at bands now, they're not telling you to go to iTunes. They're not telling you to go to the CD store. They're telling you to pre-save pre-stream the album on Spotify and Apple Music and all the things like that. I mean, I think that if bands were so adamant that streaming was bad, you wouldn't see the abundance of Lamb of God and the new Fear Factory. I mean, Fear Factory, Dino is giving away a guitar pedal, and like some pickups just to a lucky fan that saves the album on Spotify. It obviously there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it can be leveraged to work in your way, again, as a promotional tool.
Yeah. It all comes back around to things that you get. If you reach out to a publicist that you don't know and you don't have an in with, what's the first thing they ask you? What's your download numbers? What's your streaming numbers? What's your reach? A band like Fear Factory, even though they're a legacy band at this point, but say a new band like, I don't know, a band I really enjoy right now, Vexed. A big band like Fear Factory, a big band even like Metallica, they're going to go, well, we need a band for this upcoming tour. Oh, well, Vexed has 1 million followers on Instagram. They're going to reach a lot of people with this tour, so we're going to get them on there. So, that's the thing with Spotify. It's like, oh, well, they've got, 300,000 downloads or streams of this one song. So obviously it shows that they're popular. And, they're good. They're going to get there. It's weird how all of that, they need those numbers because they're visible to everybody. Back in the day, you could say, oh, our album shipped platinum, but that doesn't, that means you shipped 1 million records. It doesn't mean you sold 1 million records, but then also you can say we went platinum, but that doesn't mean, that could mean you sold 1 million, or that could mean you sold 1.8 million. That doesn't really, you don't really know where you are in the pecking order of everything, or or even,
Right.
well, I mean, I guess you kind of knew it with like charts and things like that. Like, we're number one on Billboard, but we also only sold 24,000 albums. There's some crazy stuff in there too. So I think that that visuals right there for everybody to see. Our new album came out and we've already streamed 1 million, streams of the single, and YouTube and all that stuff. So it's a numbers game. And I was listening to an interview with Chris Aiken the other day with the dude from Buck Cherry, and Chris was like trying to ask him like a horny question about how did you get the hot chick in your video, and Josh Todd hits him with, "Oh, well, we wanted someone from Instagram that had over 100,000 followers, but we knew we couldn't afford someone with 300,000 followers, so we chose this." And it was the most boring non-rock and roll answer ever to how did you get the hot chick in your video. It's not like she's the hot chick that works at Wendy's or something. It was like, well, she's an Instagram influencer that could boost our record sales with this. It's very corporate and very boring.
Yeah. I want to know how that fucker flew from California to Spain and still ended up saying, "Mexico, are you ready to hear Crazy Bitch?" There's like a 13-hour flight in between there that somehow happened. But
he's a fun dude.
You mentioned Vexed. Last new band that you listened to that really caught you, that really you said, "Wow, these guys have something."
Honestly, it's Vexed, because they took a style of kind of the gent style, which is at this point been around for a while, and you're listening to them and you're like, I thoroughly enjoy some good gent, and but there's not, it kind of feels played out at this point. We're kind of getting to that spot where it's like, all right, everything's been done. And then they hit you with that Vexed album, and it's a female vocalist, and she's doing some crazy. I interviewed her for the show, and I told her, I was like, it's almost kind of like a hip hop vibe here a little bit, and she's like, "I'm glad you caught that." Huge fan of hip hop, and some of the vocal patterns she uses, very hip hop influenced, and the guitar work. They'll just sprinkle some stuff in here and there. You're just like, all right, I didn't really see that coming. It's not what is it? Music by numbers. It's not paint by numbers with them. It's like they take the canvas that you think you're going to get, and then they kind of hit you here and there with some different stuff. So yeah, I think Vexed is probably the newest band that I've been really kind of going back to.
Okay. Why would you pick them over, say, a band like Capra?
I haven't listened to them, so
okay. So we're giving Mr. Toomey some homework. Look up Capra.
All right.
A female-fronted hardcore band.
All right.
So kind of in the same vein, because you have the female with guttural vocals, but it's something completely different at the same time. I think it's cool that Vexed is on Napalm. Napalm is really invested on a lot of different female bands, and they're all kind of different from one another. Because if you look at a Infected Rain, or you look at a Ginger, or you look at a Sumo Psycho, they're really all different from one another. And Vexed is something completely different as well.
Yeah, I just had Fernanda from Crypta on yesterday, obviously another Napalm band. And then a while back had the Diva Satanica, great name from Nervosa. And Napalm is definitely in that vein of the female fronted. And Heidi from Butcher Babies was on the show, and she didn't call it a female fronted a genre. She called it a female fronted movement, which I thought was a great way to call, name it, because it's not necessarily a sound. It just happens to be a whole bunch of bands led by women. And it's obviously had Morgan from Kitty on yesterday too. And it's, now they're like the OGs of this whole thing. It's like, you go back to some of those older bands with the lady frontmen, front ladies of the bands. And, obviously been bands throughout the years with females, but when it comes to like screaming and being in metal, you get, Kitty and even like Karen Crisis or something like that. Like some of those early ones that are kind of the OGs of this whole thing. And then now you've got, like you said, Sumo Psycho and Vexed and Crypta and Nervosa and Ginger and the vocals are like so like I tried to say this with Dino because Dino was kind of throwing out there that there might be a female fronted Fear Factory.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about, like the early days of the girls in bands. It's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it's cool, but it's like, but now it's like some of the ladies out there are passing them in now. It's pretty crazy. The talent that's out there, Ginger and like even Megan Target of Vexed. I mean, she's doing some awesome stuff with her vocals.
That's interesting. I've heard Dino say that in a few different interviews. We'll see where that all goes. I mean, I think until they finally have to pull the trigger and have to go out on tour, we're probably not going to know.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you get a sense that they have an inkling of like a few people that they have to choose from, that maybe they're gonna pick someone, and it doesn't necessarily mean because the album has Burton on it,
which is an amazing album, by the way. That Aggression Continuum is on par with any Fear Factory album, even back to Demanufacture and Obsolete. Right. If you're a Fear Factory fan, you're gonna love the album. I mean, I still spend that a lot too. I really think that he's what had another guy had on the Throwback Throwdown show. I asked him, I was like, is there a list? Is there a master list of singers? And I was like, is there 10? Is there 15? He's like, there's 4. And
oh wow.
He said that but basically since with COVID, some people can't fly in just yet. He wants to really get them in, jam with them, hang out with them, make sure they're cool people. He does have kind of a history with singers, with Tommy Vexed, and Burton, and so I'm sure he's got a little bit of a past with some of these guys. But yeah, he said he has a master list of 4. But then I also asked him, I was like, well, if you hear a guy tomorrow, will the master list be 5? And he said, yeah. The touring, I don't think it's going to start until 2022 for them. Yeah. So it could be February 2022 before we hear anything about a vocalist in Fear Factory.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, the album that they're putting out is not going to contain whoever they have in the band. And the singer may end up being just a temporary guy to do the tour. And when they decide to do another album, it may be a completely different singer once again, because there's, like you said, that they've always been surrounded with, as much as I love them, they've always had some sort of a drama surrounding them.
Yeah.
Album to album. I mean, when is the last time that they've had 2 straight albums with the same lineup?
Right.
It's been a while.
Yeah, and that's the thing with that band. It's like they got up to with Obsolete and what was after Obsolete? Digimortal. Like right around that period, they had the Cars cover that I think went gold or something, and they were so close, and then all of a sudden all the internal strife just bubbled over, and then Dino leaves, and there's 2 Fear Factory albums without him, and then he comes back and they do a couple more Fear Factory albums, and now there's going to be Fear Factory albums without Burton, and it's just always something with that band that I think that Fear Factory should get a lot more credit for so many genres. The gent genre, very Fear Factory-esque. Nu metal, Dino's credited as the guy who coined the term nu metal. Somebody asked him like what the thing was, and he said it or something. There's a song on Soul of a New Machine that could be Blind from Korn. Korn could have totally ripped off Fear Factory. And there's a lot of, and he's even insinuated because, Ross Robinson worked with early Fear Factory. It didn't work out. Ross found a new band to work with. Did Ross say, hey, why don't we try something like this? You never know. Because some of those early Korn demos are kind of weird, even weirder than what they ended up being. But so you got that. The clean singing over the screaming singing, a lot of the New England hardcore bands like Killswitch Engage, that kind of did that dynamic, could be linked back to Fear Factory. There's a lot going on there that they may or may not get credit for.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite bands to come out of the 90s. And as you're saying, just so influential on a lot of different things, whether people realize it or not, because they drew in aspects from different genres and different things to kind of make it their own. Because you think about it, I know that a lot of people give a lot of credit to, say, Godflesh and stuff like that with the industrial side of things. But if you really listen to stuff off of Obsolete, like songs like Descent or songs like Resurrection, there's definitely like a Depeche Mode factor in there as well. A lot of the lyrics are, kind of downtrodden as well. So they are taking things from other forms of music and making it metal, where a lot of bands haven't done that. And a lot of times I look back and people ask me, what are the last bands to do something original you feel in metal? And unfortunately, I have to go back and say, hey, Demanufacture and maybe the first System album. I mean, since then, we really haven't had a whole heck of a lot of stuff that really you could say, oh, wow, this is groundbreaking. This just changed the game. To me, those two bands changed the game in so many ways, with everything that you said about Fear Factory. With System, I see things with Ginger, and I even see things with Sumo Psycho, with bringing in, all the different things that, the Armenian music that they were bringing in kind of opened the door for stuff that, with ska stuff or with reggae stuff that other people hadn't tried before. And I think a lot of that comes directly from System. So.
Yeah. I mean, they always talk about like grunge being the last big movement in music and stuff. And then, I think that honestly, the new metal movement, I mean, you had bands like Korn, System of a Down, Limp Bizkit, like on top of MTV TRL, right there with NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and how big that got. And then I think another big shift in my musical taste was when I first, my buddy played me Unearth for the first time and played me early Killswitch Engage, because because they took like all that thrash that we grew up on, but we were trying to make it a music. So we were playing new metal type stuff, but we still liked Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer and all that stuff. And they took all that, but then they added a little bit more to it and started playing guitar solos again and like really shredding again. And Atreyu, I think Atreyu doesn't get enough credit for some of just bringing some of that kind of 80s flair back to the guitar, back into music and actual talent, because I mean, as much as I love most new metal, you don't need a whole lot of talent to play. There's just a series of ones and zeros on the guitar that you can play, and you'll make a song. But I mean, like Unearth and Killswitch, Atreyu, and just that whole Shadows Fall, and all those guys that just came back out as shredders. Like, oh shit, here we go again. Right. But I honestly, I do think that like a band like Killswitch is probably one of the most copied bands too. There's still new bands coming out that still have that sound, and you're like, that's Killswitch Engage again. Right.
Yeah, no,
it's
I
crazy.
agree. Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna wind things down here. I've kept you for longer than I expected. And I appreciate you hanging in here the entire time, even withstanding the barrage from Sinzak.
Sinzak's all right. Rock and Roll Podcast. Always love to see them in the chat room.
Yeah. I want to thank everyone in the chat from Chris Sinzak, honestly, and Rob Rowe. We saw Brad Dahl in here earlier. We saw Jose up in Connecticut, Jeremy in the UK. So Art, who said he was driving up to Lake Placid and watching this at the same time. Hopefully he was just listening and not watching.
Did you ask him, do you believe in miracles? That happened to Lake Placid.
And anyone else that I missed, I apologize if I missed out and didn't thank you guys. But as always, I definitely appreciate you spending your Fridays with me, as opposed to doing a million other things that I know are available. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to all my patrons that are also either in the chat or will listen to this afterwards. Again, like, share, spread the news. Tag Josh Toomey on social media and say, hey, I loved your interview. It'll let him know that he didn't waste his time on the show tonight. So
even if I was just talking to you, Vic, it would never be a waste of time, sir.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Anyway, thanks, guys. again, thanks for your time, and we will see you next time right here on the Signals from Mars live stream. The audio version will be available next week. Thank you, Josh, and thanks all of you guys. See you.
Thank you, Vic.